start to restore and conserve the beautiful cultural heritage that they have here in Petra.
In the state that it's in right now, it's pretty incredible as far as being able to reach into the past and kind of live it.
Archaeologists just solved Petra's greatest mystery, and the answer was sealed beneath the most photographed building in the ancient world for over 2,000 years. Not lost, not undiscovered, deliberately hidden. Multiple excavation proposals were blocked for 7 decades. A key archaeological memo from the 1950s vanished from public records within a year of circulation. And the team that finally broke through in 2024 was given a single private instruction before a single tool was raised. Not to treat what they found as heritage, not to document it as a discovery. The word they were given was containment. What they found beneath the treasury's forecourt does not match any burial tradition in the ancient world, and it was never meant to be found at all. The warnings they kept passing down Petra is probably the most outstanding archaeological site in Jordan. And maybe, long before any European archaeologist set foot in Petra, the Bedouin families who lived in and around the rose-red city already knew something was wrong with Al-Khazneh, the treasury. They didn't treat it the way tourists treat it today. They feared it. For generations, local families passed down rules about the structure that had nothing to do with reverence or legend. Don't approach it casually. Don't let your children play near it after sunset. Don't sleep on the ground in front of it. These weren't ghost stories. They were survival instructions, enforced the way you'd enforce a rule about not drinking from a poisoned well. No god invoked, no spirit named. The rules were simply there, passed through families wordlessly across generations that may not have fully understood where the original warning came from.
It's because we have this culture, and I will keep this culture, not for me, for my generation and for the other.
Only that it had to be followed. And this is where it gets important. Historians who study oral cultures note that abstract legends tend to evolve and grow more elaborate with each retelling. But practical survival rules, stay away from this, don't do that, tend to preserve their original form with unusual accuracy. Because we have this culture, and I will keep this culture. Not for me, for my generation, and for the others. The Bedouin families weren't telling stories. They were following instructions, and the specificity of those instructions, applied consistently across generations, suggested they came from direct experience, not imagination. The Bedouin families who issued those warnings were not occasional visitors. They lived inside Petra. They raised children there. They knew the site the way you know a house you've lived in your whole life. Every sound it makes at night, every cold spot, every room that doesn't feel right. When people with that kind of intimate, long-term knowledge of a place develop specific rules about a specific structure, the academically rigorous response is not to dismiss the rules.
We hope you enjoy it. All the best. Bye-bye.
It is to ask what those people knew that the visitors didn't. When 19th century European explorers arrived, several recorded these warnings directly in their travel journals. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, the first Westerner to formally document Petra in 1812, noted that his local guides refused to linger near the structure. They moved through quickly, eyes forward, no explanation given. Later travelers reported something stranger still. Men who camped near Al-Khazneh at night described rhythmic vibrations rising from below the stone floor. Others described sudden temperature drops and a sharp metallic smell, iron and wet stone, that appeared without warning and faded just as fast. Some reported a low, subsonic resonance they felt in their chests, before they heard it with their ears.
Emergence of Petra.
All right, the short answer is we know nothing. And that's the part that distresses people, right? There's so much more to be discovered. As we know, this site is...
The kind of sensation modern acoustics associates with large enclosed spaces that have been sealed for extended periods of time. These reports came from travelers across different decades who had never read each other's journals. No contact, no shared source, nearly identical descriptions. The scientific community dismissed all of it for over a century. Folklore, superstition, men sleeping rough in the desert. Then something surfaced that was considerably harder to dismiss. A Jordanian archaeological memo from the 1950s reportedly described the ground beneath the treasury's forecourt as structurally anomalous and not of natural formation. The memo apparently included survey data and a recommendation for immediate formal investigation. The whole emergence of Petra, all right. The short answer is, we know nothing. And that's the part that distresses people. There's so much more to be discovered, as we know this site is. Within 12 months of its circulation, it vanished from public records. No retraction, no correction, no explanation, just gone. And that wasn't even the most unsettling thing buried in the archives. 70 years of locked doors. This is inside the royal treasury. There's several doors, and the ceiling. Between the 1960s and 2020, multiple research teams submitted formal proposals to study the subsurface of the treasury's forecourt. Most were rejected outright. Some stalled indefinitely. A few never received any response at all. Jordan's Department of Antiquities gave the same explanation every single time. Structural risk. On paper, that sounded reasonable. The treasury is irreplaceable. Excavation near a 2,000-year-old rock-cut facade carries genuine risk. Nobody wants to be the team that damages it. But behind closed doors, the language was very different. Dr. Mohammed Najjar, one of Jordan's most respected field archaeologists, later noted that internal discussions focused less on engineering risk and more on what he called the problem of exposure. Several internal documents reportedly warned that subsurface discoveries could trigger cultural panic. The concern wasn't that digging would damage the building. It was that digging would reveal something that couldn't be managed once it was known. Think about what that means. In the world of institutional archaeology, discoveries are almost always framed as achievements, additions to the human record, answers to long-standing questions. The language of management and containment belongs to crisis communications, not research. For officials to be using that language means someone had reason to believe that what lay beneath the treasury was not simply unknown. It was potentially destabilizing. Here's what nobody expected to find in the archive trail.
They carved these from the top down. These are huge.
So it's one of the more important monuments in Petra.
At least 3 rejected proposals referenced an unauthorized excavation from the 1930s, whose notes had completely disappeared from institutional records. But one document from that period survived. Researchers who reviewed it described a single blunt instruction written at the bottom of the page. Do not disturb the lower chamber. It is not a tomb. No explanation, no context, just a warning about what it wasn't. Field teams that visited the site informally were told the space was sealed for protection, not preservation. That distinction showed up repeatedly in private meeting notes, and never once in official reports. Protection implies a threat. Preservation implies value. Someone had decided that what lay beneath the treasury was dangerous, not precious. Dangerous enough to suppress documentation for 7 decades. Dangerous enough that the word containment appeared in private correspondence about a site visited by millions of people every year. Then, in 2024, leaked satellite imaging circulated among research institutions. Density anomalies beneath the forecourt, straight lines, right angles, geometry that could only be human-made. The data spread faster than anyone could contain it, and the pressure to grant access became impossible to resist. Permission was granted, but with conditions unlike anything the archaeological community had encountered before. Reversible trenches only. Millimeter-level documentation at every stage. They carved these from the top down. These are huge, so it's one of the more important monuments in Petra. Real-time sensors monitoring stress fractures in the surrounding stone. These conditions were unusual, but they weren't the most unusual thing about this permit. One final instruction was delivered privately to the dig leadership before a single tool was raised. This project is not treasure hunting. Do not treat what you find as heritage. Treat it as containment. That word, delivered in 2024, at one of the world's most famous sites. The same word that had appeared in private correspondence about this site for decades, in documents that were then quietly removed from accessible records. There are coincidences in archaeology, and there are patterns. This was a pattern. Subscribe now, because what the team found beneath that forecourt is exactly the discovery that makes 7 decades of suppressed proposals suddenly make complete sense. And we're only getting started. The shape that shouldn't be there. The excavation team deployed 3 independent survey technologies simultaneously: ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity imaging, and magnetometry. 3 separate systems, 3 separate operators, 3 completely separate data sets. Every single one returned the same result: a void, not a crack, not a natural cavity formed by erosion or geological shift. A rectangular space with straight edges, defined corners, and proportions matching Nabatean structures described in ancient inscriptions specifically associated with restriction. Not burial, not ceremony, containment. Dr. Sarah Khalil, a geoarchaeologist from the University of Jordan, ran her sweeps 3 consecutive times. The anomaly appeared identically on every pass. She set down the handset and removed her headset slowly. The way you do when you need a moment before you speak. She called the dig director over.
The doorway lintel itself, water is coming over the top during the rainy season. You can see how the stone looks like it's just melting.
According to team accounts, neither of them said a word for nearly 30 seconds. The shape was too precise, too deliberate, too deep. The question they had been hired to answer was suddenly standing right beneath their feet. And this is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Several radar sweeps returned distorted signal patterns. The waves behaved as if something inside the chamber was actively interfering with the equipment's resonance frequency. Technicians recalibrated and reran the entire sequence. The distortion was identical every single time. It wasn't machine error. It wasn't surface interference from the surrounding rock. The disruption was coming from inside the sealed space itself. The leading hypothesis was that the chamber contained materials or accumulated gases affecting signal propagation. But that hypothesis raised its own deeply uncomfortable question. What materials? How long had they been accumulating? And what had produced them? Magnetic readings added another layer nobody was prepared for. The chamber showed residual heat signatures entirely inconsistent with burial spaces. Tombs stabilized to surrounding rock temperature over centuries. That is a documented, predictable, universal pattern across every tradition in the Near East and Mediterranean world. This chamber hadn't stabilized. The data pointed to repeated high heat events occurring before the ceiling was sealed. Not a single funeral pyre. Something deliberate. Something that happened more than once. Something that generated enough sustained heat to leave a thermal signature that persisted 2,000 years later. Internal sediment scans showed compression in curved
The
formations.
superpower of the time. So the Nabateans, even though they were greatly outnumbered, they were able to fend off the superpower.
Material pushed outward toward the walls, as if bodies or large masses had shifted violently inside before the chamber was locked shut for the final time. Dr. Richard Jones, a structural archaeologist from the University of St. Andrews, reviewed the composite reconstruction. He didn't hedge. He set his pen down on the table slowly, like a man choosing his words very carefully, and said it, almost to himself. The chamber was designed to allow entry. It was not designed to support exit. That assessment came before anyone had touched the seal. Steps cut for confinement. Physical excavation moved with agonizing slowness. The doorway lintel itself. Water is coming over the top during the rainy season. You can see how the stone looks like it's just melting. Metal tools replaced with wooden instruments. Every sediment layer documented before removal. Every surface photographed from 3 angles. The team worked in near silence, and the silence felt appropriate. Because everyone understood by now that what they were uncovering was not a monument. It was a mechanism. The first thing to emerge from beneath the forecourt floor was a set of narrow stone steps cut directly into the bedrock, descending at a steep, irregular angle. But the geometry was immediately wrong for funerary use. Burial stairways in Nabatean architecture are built for careful, repeated access, wide enough for pallbearers, angled gently for solemn procession, finished smooth because the people using them are expected to return. These stairs were different in every measurable way. They dropped sharply, almost no stable footing. The angle of descent was steep enough that ascending would require both hands. The width was narrow enough that 2 people could not pass each other, which eliminated any possibility this was designed for ceremonial procession. They were specifically engineered to disorient anyone descending, and they were not engineered in any way for anyone coming back up. The walls flanking the staircase were completely plain. No carvings, no inscriptions, no symbols of death or resurrection of the kind found throughout Petra's necropolis. But the stone blocks were fitted in a load-bearing pattern that resisted outward force. Structural analysis confirmed it. The reinforcement only made sense if significant pressure was expected from the inside. This wasn't built to prevent the stairway from collapsing inward. It was built to hold something in. And this is where the physical evidence stopped being abstract and started being personal. At arm height, along several wall sections, the team found shallow grooves and irregular scoring marks that didn't match any construction tool used in the building's original assembly. Specialists examined them closely. The marks were not decorative. They were not inscriptions. They had been worn into the surface through sustained friction and force. The superpower of the time. So the Nabateans, even though they were greatly outnumbered, they were able to fend off the superpower by hands or by objects dragged repeatedly against the stone over an extended period. The pattern suggested resistance, movement that was not voluntary. Here's what makes that finding impossible to set down. Construction marks and chisel scoring are found throughout Petra's rock-cut architecture. The Nabatean builders left evidence of their tools everywhere. What they did not leave, in any other documented structure across the entire site, were marks that could only be explained by something pressing against the walls from the inside. Sustained, repeated, over time. The people responsible for those marks were not building anything. They were trying to get out. Partway down the staircase, a secondary passage branched off to the side. It had been packed tightly with stone and debris forced in from the outside and deliberately sealed after the main structure was locked. Whatever it once connected to, that connection had been permanently severed. The care taken to close it was not hasty or improvised. It was thorough, considered.
But due to the interest in the region, which has been developed from the 90s onward.
Which means the people who sealed it expected someone, at some point, to look for it. At the bottom of the stairs, a massive stone slab sealed the chamber completely. The fit was precise to a degree the team had not encountered elsewhere in Petra. No gaps, no air channels, no locking mechanism, because none was needed. The weight and precision of the seal made opening it from the inside a physical impossibility. Laboratory tests confirmed zero airflow penetration through the seal's edges. Dr. Aaron Darby, an archaeologist from the University of Tennessee, stood in front of that seal for a long time before he spoke. When he finally did, his voice came out quieter than he intended. This is overkill for a burial. That level of isolation is unnecessary unless the goal is absolute permanent containment. 2,000 years of silence. And then they broke it. What the dead revealed. The seal broke with a sound the team described as a slow exhale, as if the chamber had been holding its breath. Trapped air hit them immediately, heavy, stale, carrying the smell of decay mixed with soot and something sharp and chemical that burned the back of the throat. One team member stepped back involuntarily. Another covered her face. The dig director held his position and waited. Nobody moved for a moment. The first chamber held a kind of terrible order. Skeletons laid out carefully, bones aligned. But the details were immediately, viscerally wrong. Several remains were arranged face down, a posture absent from every documented Nabatean burial tradition in the archaeological record. Others were bent sharply forward, limbs in positions that no grieving family, no priest, no funerary tradition anywhere in the ancient Near East would choose. These positions didn't reflect ritual. They looked imposed, forced. The bodies had been arranged by someone else after death, with a precision that served a purpose no one on the team could name yet. No valuables placed alongside the remains, no jewelry, no markers of rank or identity. Just small ceramic bowls arranged at precise, even intervals. One vessel was found pressed against a rib cage, held in place at the exact moment of death, and never disturbed again. And here's what nobody expected from the wall chemistry. Analysis of the chamber surfaces detected treated limestone compounds associated in Nabatean contexts, specifically with containment structures, not mortuary spaces. Several of the ceramic groupings match spatial arrangements found in inscriptions describing what ancient texts called houses of silence. Restricted places where people were sent to be forgotten entirely, not executed, not buried, disappeared. The real purpose of this structure was coming into focus, and it was nothing close to what any textbook had ever suggested. Then the team opened the second chamber. The walls were black floor to ceiling, layer upon layer of soot from repeated controlled burning carried out while the space was completely sealed from the outside. The fires had not been set once. They had been set multiple times in an enclosed space with no ventilation, which means the people inside were present during at least some of those events. Skeletons were piled together, limbs tangled, skulls fractured, ribs broken in patterns entirely inconsistent with natural settling over time. Dr. Khalil looked at the physical evidence and said exactly what it demanded. The damage occurred before death, or during extreme physical confinement, not centuries after sealing, during life. One detail stopped every person on the team. A child's skeleton pressed tightly against an adult, arms positioned as if reaching, as if in the final moments someone had pulled a child close and refused to let go. It didn't reflect any known burial custom from any culture in the region. It reflected a final, desperate act of protection. Due to the interest in the region, which has been developed from the 90s onwards, by someone who understood, with complete certainty, that there was no way out. Nothing in the archaeological training of anyone on that team had prepared them for that specific image. And this is where the chemical evidence became impossible to set aside. Near the far wall, 3 skeletons had been set apart from the rest and positioned deliberately, not piled, not abandoned, but placed with clear intention. One showed markers consistent with higher social status. The other 2 displayed severe trauma. Ceramic jars nearby contained thick residue. Early chemical testing identified iron-rich compounds mixed with ash and plant resin, substances historically linked, in ancient Near Eastern contexts, to inducing confusion and physical compliance in confined individuals. Multiple skeletons throughout both chambers showed joint dislocations consistent with prolonged binding. These were not people who died peacefully and were interred with care. They were placed inside a sealed structure, restrained, and left. The architecture ensured they could not leave. The deliberate absence of identifying markings ensured no one would remember they had been there. Here's what was missing, and this is the part Dr. Darby couldn't stop coming back to. No inscriptions anywhere in either chamber, no names, no funerary texts, no dedicatory prayers, nothing. In a civilization that carved its identity into every tomb face and public monument across hundreds of kilometers of desert, the complete absence of inscription in this space was not an oversight. It was an instruction. Dr. Darby stood at the chamber entrance and said it flatly, almost to the wall itself. This wasn't a tomb that failed. It was a system that worked exactly as it was designed to. Memory was never the goal. Erasure was. The people in those chambers had been removed from the historical record with the same precision and deliberate craft the Nabateans applied to everything else they built. It was not careless. It was architectural. And the structure above them, the one the world had been photographing for 2 centuries, was the final, perfect element of that system. The stone that was meant to hide ancient Nabatean sources reference a category of restricted structure used to isolate individuals considered dangerous, contaminated, or socially unacceptable to the ruling order. The terminology varies across inscriptions, but the function is consistent. Spaces designed not for mourning, not for ceremony, but for removal. Not to honor the dead, to disappear the living. The chambers beneath the treasury match those descriptions in every measurable detail. The one-way staircase, the walls reinforced to resist internal pressure, the blocked secondary passage, the repeated burning in a sealed, airless space, the restrained bodies, the absolute erasure of identity. Every physical element points in exactly the same direction. But here is the thing that makes everything land differently. The ornate facade carved into the cliff face, the one that tens of thousands of tourists photograph every single day, was never the point of this structure. It was the mask, engineered to pull every eye upward toward beauty and grandeur and the overwhelming scale of Nabatean craftsmanship, so that no one standing in front of it would ever think to look down. The treasury didn't invite people in. It kept something out of sight, out of memory, and out of history. and for over 2,000 years, it worked perfectly. If the most photographed building in Petra was hiding this beneath its floor, then every assumption about what else lies beneath this city has to be reconsidered. Every sealed passage, every unexplored chamber, every structure the Nabateans carved into these cliffs and then walked away from without explanation or inscription. Petra's necropolis contains hundreds of rock-cut structures that have never been fully excavated. The treasury was the one considered well-documented, studied for decades, mapped by satellite, visited by millions. And it was still concealing something the entire archaeological establishment was never prepared to face. That is not a footnote in the history of this civilization. It is a fracture line running through all of it. And here is the part that is hardest to sit with. The people sealed inside that chamber were erased so deliberately and so completely that even now, 2,000 years later, we still don't know their names. We don't know what they did. We don't know who decided they needed to disappear or why the decision was made. We don't know if they were guilty of something real or simply inconvenient to someone powerful. We don't know if they were political threats, religious dissidents, or people who simply stood in the wrong person's way at the wrong moment. We don't know if the child pressed against that adult had done anything at all, or if that child was sealed in because leaving them out would have been complicated. Because someone in authority decided that a witness, no matter how small, was still a witness. We don't know their names. We don't know their faces. We don't know if anyone outside those walls ever wondered what happened to them. The Nabatean system of erasure was comprehensive enough that not a single record survived to suggest these people existed at all, and the structure built above them was magnificent enough that nobody thought to look. We only know that someone built an elaborate, magnificent, iconic structure directly above them, that breathtaking, column-lined facade that draws millions of visitors through the Sikh every year. It was designed to be looked at, to fill the eye and the mind so completely that the question of what lay beneath it would never occur to anyone standing in front of it. In that sense, the real architectural achievement of Al-Khazneh has nothing to do with how it was built. It has to do with how perfectly it performed its actual function. Not as a treasury, not as a tomb, as a machine for erasure. It worked so well that we spent 2,000 years admiring the facade while the truth sat sealed beneath our feet. Not lost, not forgotten by accident. Deliberately, architecturally, permanently hidden by a civilization skilled enough to build one of the most beautiful structures in the ancient world, and cold enough to use that beauty as a lid. Right now, millions of people have photographs of that facade on their phones. They stood in front of it, tilted their cameras up, and captured the grandeur. Standing directly above a sealed chamber containing restrained bodies, scorched walls, and a child who died reaching for someone. They photographed the mask. They never knew the building was looking back. If that changes how you see the ancient world, if you want to be here when the next sealed chamber beneath Petra finally opens, hit like and subscribe. There are more of them down there.